So I will try not to be repetitive after all these critical contributions from colleagues. I'll try maybe to focus on the increased killings in the West Bank since the last 2 years, while also contextualizing these killings so that we not only talk about killings as of numbers. We have been hearing a lot the phrase or the dominant a phrase that the year 2022 has been one of the deadliest years for Palestinians in the West Bank. And so far this year in the West Bank, there has been more Palestinian killed while we're still in September. And in order not to basically refer to this increase of numbers of killing to a so-called far-right government, as Rula has indicated, it's important to contextualize the policy of killings and deprivation of Palestinian lives within the broader context. So it's not about a far-right government, but it's part of a logic of elimination against Palestinians that is part of the settler colonial project. It's also part of the apartheid regime that Ken has also talked about. There's an intention to dominate Palestinians and to suppress their resistance since 1948. And the use of killings and excessive use of force is just one tool to basically maintain this apartheid regime. And so the occupation, when we talk about the West Bank and the Gaza, it's just an extension to these broader regimes. While I will be talking also about the West Bank, it's important not to keep fragmenting the Palestinian people whenever we talk about Palestine. So even if I will be talking about the West Bank, it's important to basically understand all these policies as directed against the Palestinian people as a whole, wherever they are located. And for example, in the Gaza Strip, we know that since the illegal blockade on the Gaza Strip, there has been countless massive destructive military offensives on the Gaza Strip, depriving Palestinians of their lives, destructing their civilian properties. What we're seeing in the past 2 years is that there's also intense and kind of unprecedented use of these military offensives on Palestinians in the West Bank, things that we have not seen as Palestinians since the Second Intifada. And maybe I would like to talk about some of the trends or patterns that has been used during these military attacks, which are basically concentrated in mostly in Nablus and in Jenin, as everyone might have heard. So in these military offensive, we have observed the unprecedented use of, for example, aerial drone bombardments on densely populated residential places in Nablus and Jenin, the use of very advanced military means and methods against these Palestinians in these areas, including military vehicles. In July, for example, this year in Jenin, there has been also we observed the use of these D9 military bulldozers that were destructing the camp and the infrastructure in the camp and bulldozing Palestinian property. We have also seen in one trend in these military offensive that are ongoing and expanding, the use basically, the Israeli occupying forces would raid Palestinian homes. They would use this home as a military base for shelling and killing Palestinians, while Palestinian families, including children, are present in these homes. So basically, this is a policy of also terrorizing Palestinians, including children. We have seen, for example, that they would come to a Palestinian home, take the windows of very high apartments as a position for them for sniping against Palestinian and making big holes in these windows and the walls of the apartments to basically as well shell Palestinians. We have also seen a policy, many of the residents in the camps were basically describing the attacks on them as if the Israeli occupying forces were shooting at any Palestinian that was moving. So any shadow that was would appear to the Israeli occupying forces would be shot at. And this is part of the shoot to kill policy against Palestinians as well. One case that I can talk about, for example, is in January this year, while Israel raided the Jenin refugee camp, a 60-year-old Palestinian was just looking through her window, and she was shot at from an Israeli sniper. Her name is Aseel AlBajeh. So this is just an example to show how this is part of basically dominating the entire camp, in this case, the Jenin refugee camp. Of course, there are many horrific examples of how these military attacks are taking place, including the attacks on, for example, medical teams and Palestinian ambulances, whereby we would see when the Israeli forces raid these places, which are densely populated, they would surround the entire camp, for example, with military vehicles, preventing Palestinian ambulances from entering the camp. And so there would be disruption of also offering medical services to Palestinians. I will now maybe put also a link in the chat for everyone in this call to look at the Al-Haq's forensic architecture investigation, which basically analyzes two military attacks on Jenin and Nablus. And it's a useful tool to basically visualize how these military attacks take place. And maybe I will end also with that these military attacks, as maybe Rula has indicated, are not part of far-right government or fascist government, but it's part of how Israel looks at Palestinian. The Israeli settler colonial regime is basically looking at Palestinians as people who are marked for elimination and erasure. And whenever we see growing Palestinian resistance, like the growing resistance that has been happening in Jenin, for example, since the past 2 years, we see a growing suppression to this resistance. And here it's important to contextualize as well how these Palestinians who are leading this resistance are just Palestinians in their early 20s. These are Palestinians who have been born to ongoing occupation and colonizations. They have been born refugees, denied their right to return since more than 70 years now. And they have witnessed not only this Israeli colonization, but also no accountability, no countermeasures, as well as an internal situation whereby they are not they do not have agency to represent all their political aspiration. And so this is the context of these Palestinians who are leading this Palestinian resistance. And they have all the right to basically resist this colonial domination, illegal apartheid regime, and illegal Israeli occupation.